Hey, Champion Nation. Welcome to the Champion Nation podcast.
Hey, Champion Nation. My name is Kayshawn Cooper, your host of the Champion Nation podcast, as well as the founder of the Champion Nation. I am here with Chet Galaska. Did I say that right, Chet?
Yes, you did.
Absolutely wonderful. I'm here with Chet, and we're here to talk about something that it is extremely near and dear to my heart. And we're talking about diabetes. Almost 6 years ago, I have a poster of my mother right here that no one can see, obviously. But back in 2017, 11/30, so November 30th, 2017, is when I received the dreadful call that my mother passed away. It wrecked my world. It really sent me down a series of questions and despair that I thought I would never be able to move forward without my mother. And the leading cause of her death was diabetes. And I'm here with Chet today because he's going to enlighten me, enlighten you as a viewer, and you as a listener. So, I look forward to hearing what Chet has to say, to see what we can do to possibly educate our listeners and viewers and maybe eradicate the disease if that's at all possible. Chet, welcome to the Champion Nation.
Thanks, Krishan. It's great to be here.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry to hear about your mom, but we'll be talking about what may have happened with her, what probably happened with her. And I think you'll probably learn some things that will be helpful for you in the future.
Absolutely.
I hope so anyway.
No, I hope so as well. So, Chet, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and why you do what you do.
Sure. I'm not a medical professional of any kind. I'm just a guy who's had diabetes for over 40 years. I was diagnosed in 1981. But I've learned quite a bit. I've had type 1 for all those decades, and I've learned a lot about it in that time. But what I've come to realize is how badly most people understand diabetes and how much misinformation is out there. It's unfair to diabetics, and it's dangerous because diabetics don't talk about the disease often, with the result that they don't talk to other people about it. So other people are left not knowing much about the disease. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm retired. But in retirement, I've developed the Challenge Diabetes program, which involved writing a few books, going out and talking to people, and having a 3-week program that I invite members of the community to. And we were going along pretty well until COVID hit. And then everything died. Nobody was getting together in groups. And so the whole program just kind of came to a screeching halt. But during that time, podcasts got more popular. And I realized that if I really want to reach people, podcasts are a much more effective way of doing it than talking to groups of 10, 20, or 30 people at a time. So this has worked out really well. People like you have had me on the program, and I've reached people I've never, ever could have dreamed of reaching. So I plan to continue to do that and get to as many people as possible. What I found is that generally people really don't understand it. The hosts don't, and generally the hosts are really happy to hear what I've had to say, and their audiences are as well. Before I get started with the questions about diabetes, I'd like to explain why I was motivated to do this sort of thing in the first place.
Absolutely.
I was in Chicago during the week when Ron Santo was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. There were a lot of stories about him in the media, and it turned out that Ron Santo had diabetes back in the 1960s. He had type 1, which meant he was insulin dependent. So there was one great story, but I got to give you a little bit of background before I tell the story so it makes sense to you. Everybody knows that high blood sugar is what causes the long-term damage in diabetics, but low blood sugar can be a problem too. If you take insulin or certain type 2 medications, your blood sugar can drop too low. And the problem with that is that your brain takes glucose directly from the bloodstream. It doesn't store it like other blood cells, other tissues do. So when there isn't enough sugar, the brain starts to go haywire. You can start sweating, your eyesight gets funky, you lose your coordination. If it gets low enough, you'll pass out. So it's a serious thing, but it's easily fixable. All you need to do is eat something sugary and get that blood sugar level back up, and you come right back to normal. So that's the background. So the story is this. Santo is in a game in Chicago. It's the last of the ninth. The Cubs are up. They're down by 2. It's 2 men on base and 2 outs. Santo's in the on-deck circle. Then he starts feeling the symptoms of a low blood sugar coming on. Now, he kept it to himself that he had diabetes. He was afraid the Cubs would fire him if they found out. And he was probably right. That's the way things were back then. If the Cubs realized he was a diabetic, he may have been out of his job.
Absolutely.
So nobody knew he had diabetes. And nobody knew that he was eating candy bars when he needed to raise his blood sugar. That was just a routine part of what he did. So anyway, he's in the on-deck circle. He feels this coming on. And he knows what the consequences can be if it gets too low. So he's praying that the guy at the plate will either make a hit, drive a couple of runs in, or make an out and retire the side. Well, the guy walks. So now it's bases loaded, 2 outs, bottom of the ninth. Santo walks up to the plate, Kashan, and he said he looked up and he saw 3 scoreboards, 3 pitchers, 30-some-odd people standing out in the field. When the pitcher threw the ball, it looked like I had a slinky attached to the back of it. So he took a cut at the ball, connected, and put it out of the park for a walk-off grand slam home run. So he made it around the bases, and he got back to the dugout in time to eat his Snickers bar. Right. So his sugar comes back up, and nobody's the wiser. Well, most people think that's a great story because he had a walk-off grand slam home run.
Absolutely.
But guys like me who have type 1 diabetes and take insulin and have been there when your sugar's going low, you know it. Nobody else does. And you're just hoping you can sneak yourself some sugar to bring it up before anybody knows it even happened. And, 99% of the time, that's what we do. It's seamless, so it's one of those secrets that nobody knows because diabetics don't talk about what's going on. So anyway, I came home and started telling that story to people. And that's when I realized how poorly most people understand diabetes. They didn't have a clue as to what I was talking about. And what was worse than that is that they started asking me questions about diabetes, mainly about type 2 diabetes, because that's the kind that 95% of diabetics have. It breaks out to about 95% type 2, and the other 5% are type 1s. And then there are other, like gestational diabetes when women get pregnant. That sometimes happens, but those are a very small percentage of the total number of cases. So people started asking me about type 2. And what I realized when I started looking up the actual answers to the questions is that I had it all wrong. There were things I believed about type 2 that were very unfair. And they were just plain wrong. One of the questions people ask me is, what wrong things do people believe? And one of the wrong things that I believed, along with most other people, is that type 2 is caused by being overweight. When I looked into it, I realized that the CDC says that 70% of us are overweight, but only 10% of us have diabetes. So that doesn't add up.
It does not.
Only 1 out of 7 overweight people ever becomes diabetic. The other is that you're sedentary, and another is that you got it because you ate too much sugar. Well, none of those are true. In fact, type 2 diabetes is at its source a genetic problem. There was just a study completed by the University of Massachusetts, and they found that there were at least 117 genes that are connected with type 2 diabetes.
Wow.
And if you go to the American Diabetes Association's website, they tell you right there, type 1 and type 2 start with genetics, and it's triggered by something in the environment. The problem is that the genetics are so complicated and the triggers are so varied that they can't tell you, well, don't do this or do that. We just don't know enough about it to be able to tell people what to do. So when you first get type 2 or type 1, a lot of people feel guilty about it because they themselves believe that they got it because they're a little overweight, like 70% of us are.
Right.
But it's just not true. So that's the main problem that I see with society and diabetes. We have this idea that diabetics got it because they brought it on themselves. In fact, there was one researcher that I quote in my book. He said that diabetes is one of the few diseases in America today where it's socially acceptable to blame the victim. It's kind of like putting you in the same category as a heavy smoker who gets lung cancer. But the difference is that the things that we do are not what causes the problem in the first place. I'd like to explain just how diabetes works and how it starts, if I could do that.
Absolutely.
The first thing to do is explain how normal bodies work. When a person without diabetes eats, the food gets digested into glucose, and the glucose winds up in your blood. When it's in there, your pancreas senses that the blood glucose level is high, and it produces a hormone called insulin, and it releases it into the blood. Insulin's job is to unlock the body's cells to let the glucose go through the cell walls and into the cells where it's used. So it gets into the cells, so it leaves the bloodstream, and that's what brings the blood sugar back down. So this happens naturally. It's an amazing process.
Wow.
Well, in diabetics, that process doesn't work anymore. At least it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. In the case of type 1s, we've had an autoimmune disease that triggers our body to turn on itself. So our immune system kills the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. So we don't produce insulin. Actually, we produce a little bit, but nowhere near enough to take care of the blood sugar. So in our case, we have to take insulin. Insulin breaks down in digestion, so we have to take injections, usually several times a day, because you try to get the insulin in before you eat so that it's there when the food gets digested and it keeps your blood sugar relatively good range. Now, type 2 is a different disease. What happens with type 2s is that they get a condition called insulin resistance. And that is exactly what it says it is. It makes your body cells resistant to insulin. Because of that, it takes more and more insulin to open them up to allow the blood sugar in. Over time, your pancreas wears out because the insulin resistance naturally gets worse as time goes on. And by the time you're diagnosed with prediabetes, you've already lost half the capacity of your pancreas to make insulin. And so that's what the problem is. You've got two systemic things going on here. In type 1, you've got a pancreas that no longer makes the hormone. And in type 2, you've got insulin resistance, which is never going to go away. Even if your blood sugar is below diabetic levels, you're still in a fight, and it's not going to end unless we have some sort of medical breakthrough. So that's what happens. Our systems get disrupted, and now we're stuck fighting this disease.
Chet, that was a lot.
Yeah, well,
that was a lot, and thank you so much for sharing it. My mother, she didn't talk about her diabetes. My grandmother, she passed away. She had diabetes as well. My grandmother, when she passed away in the hospital. Her appendix burst. And
wow.
And the thing is, this was probably around 17 years ago, maybe 17, 18 years ago. The doctor said, hey, we cannot do surgery because her blood sugars are too high. So the doctors were choosing between, do we remove the appendix or do we do the surgery and risk this? And, it's a flip of a coin. It's Russian roulette. Yeah. They didn't do the surgery and she passed away. So I've lost two women that are near and dear to my heart due to diabetes. And that's one of the reasons that I do donate to the American Diabetes Fund or whatever. Yeah. I can't think of the name off the top of my head right now, but I do donate monthly to that. The thing is, thank you for all that you do. The concept of blaming, often surrounds diabetes, blaming this, blaming that. Yep. People assuming it's their lifestyle choice. Up until this very conversation at this very moment, I honestly believe it was that. But from what I'm hearing, that's not the answer in its totality. So how can we shift this narrative?
Well, first, let me just add a little bit to what you just mentioned. The being overweight and the diet and all that stuff does come into play.
Okay.
Once you have insulin resistance, then it becomes important to watch what you eat and to exercise and to watch your weight. Now, I'll explain quickly why that is. With the weight, even though it doesn't cause diabetes, it does make insulin resistance worse once you have it. When we think of fat, we usually think of the soft, squishy stuff on the outside of your body, but there are actually two kinds of fats. There's another one called visceral fat that's packed internally around your organs. It's a more of a solid fat. Well, the more visceral fat you have, the more your insulin resistance will get worse, because that's what makes it worse. So that's why they ask you to lose weight. Excuse me. We're told that if you lose between 5 and 7% of your body weight, that you're going to help yourself with diabetes.
Okay.
The reason is that when you lose weight, visceral fat is the first fat you lose. So you're actually getting rid of the stuff that is making the insulin resistance worse. So you're helping to not make that condition force your pancreas to produce more insulin. The better your insulin resistance is, the less insulin your pancreas is forced to produce, and the longer it will last. Now, as far as the food is concerned, you try to reduce the amount of sugar that gets put into your bloodstream in the first place. And the way you do that is by avoiding foods that are going to raise your blood sugar. This gets pretty complicated in that it's not just sugar itself that raises it. Carbohydrates do, and starches do. There are two kinds of carbohydrate. There's starch and sugar. Well, the sugar is already pretty much into its glucose form, but the other has to be digested first. Now, carbohydrates are all over the place. We all figure they're in donuts and breads and stuff like that, but they're in corn, they're in certain vegetables, like peas are very high in carbohydrate. Your breads are. And you have to really take a look at the food you're eating and know which ones are going to raise the blood sugar. You don't have to avoid them totally, but you want to cut down on them and substitute something that's lower carbohydrate. Because here again, the less carbohydrate you eat, the lower your blood sugar is going to be. And again, it reduces the strain on your pancreas. With carbohydrate, by the way, this is a stunning fact. 1 gram of carbohydrate digests into 1 gram of sugar. So if you're eating bread, which is high carb, 1 gram of bread will become 1 gram of sugar. So it's exactly the same thing.
Wow.
But that's what people often don't know. They don't realize that so many other foods, aside from sugar, that they need to avoid. Another thing is that we have all these sugar-free products out there now, but you have to read the packaging, because a lot of them are sweetened not with sugar, but with some other substance that is a carbohydrate. So there are some foods out there where, there's zero sugar, but they're the same amount of a different sweetener. So, the carbs are there anyway. I know people who eat a bag of candy watching a movie, and when I tell them, you got to read that label, see what kind of candy you're eating, because some of those candies it's just like eating sugar. You don't think you are, but you are. So that's one of the things that I teach in the Challenge Diabetes class, and also in the book, just how you need to look at your food.
And I want to get to the book, but I do have a question, or a few questions I want to ask prior to getting to the book. Denial seems to be a common coping mechanism with individuals with type 2 diabetes. And I know you said you're not a healthcare professional, but from your standpoint, you've been doing this for a while. How can healthcare professionals and support systems intervene early to prevent complications from arising from this denial?
Yeah, I guess I would like them to take the fact that people don't bring it on themselves to heart. Uh, Unfortunately, many medical professionals really don't know much about diabetes. I've had, you know, my doctor thanked me for giving him a copy of the book, and he said he learned a lot. But he's not a diabetes specialist, and the
Correct.
stuff that I get into, I put it in easily understandable writing. But a lot of stuff I get into is something that doctors don't deal with too much. Another problem, Kashan, is that when I go to the doctor, I spend maybe 15 minutes with him. In 10 minutes, he's looking at the computer and asking me questions.
Right.
And even if he wanted to, he hasn't got the time to explain what I already explained to you today. That's why one of the reasons I like podcasts, because we can talk about this and you give me enough time to lay it all out. But frankly, medical professionals don't even get that much time. Even if they know what the deal is, they can't do it. But there are others who still think that weight brings it on and all the other misperceptions that are out there. So I would hope that they would just learn these basic facts and be more supportive toward diabetics. There's also a term they use. It's being compliant or non-compliant.
Yes.
And that's if a person is doing everything the medical professional wants them to, then they're doing wonderfully and they're compliant. If they're not, then they're non-compliant. But dealing with diabetes is a very difficult thing. It's if you're going to really take care of type 2s by the book, you've got a pretty rigid diet and exercise routine that you're going to do every day, day after day, because the key is to have a steady blood sugar level as much as you can make it. But that's very hard to do. Your diets are going to vary somewhat. You're not going to kill yourself eating bland foods all the time. You got to have a little bit of wiggle room. And that's, I think, is what people don't understand. This idea of a rigid diet and workout routine is something that is just not practical for most of us unless we really have iron will. I mean, there are some people who have a lot of willpower. Frankly, I'm not one of them.
I'm not either.
Yeah, most people aren't. I mean, you got to live life, right? But the thing you need to do is understand the mechanism of how this works and do the best you can.
Absolutely.
You can't eat the wrong foods all the time because it will kill you. I mean, it does kill people. And, to get back to the stigma and the shame, the fact that people blame diabetics makes diabetics unwilling to talk about it because nobody wants to be thought of as being fat and lazy and irresponsible and, being the reason for them having diabetes. And by and large, that's what people think.
Absolutely.
To tell you the truth, you know what, Sean, that's what I thought too.
Yeah.
Until I started looking into it, I really thought that all a type 2 had to do was lose some weight and they would be okay. But that's not even close to the truth. It doesn't matter how much weight they lose. They'll control it better, but they'll never be rid of insulin resistance.
So I'm assuming your book, the diabetes book, What Everyone Should Know, it aims to provide factual information. So in your book, you do talk about the facts.
Yeah.
What are the key misconceptions and myths that you have found are most important to address on that platform?
I think the most important ones we've already covered. The idea that being overweight and sedentary and eating sugar and high carbohydrate foods causes diabetes. That's probably the biggest one. The most rewarding things that happened to me when I was doing the Challenge Diabetes program was when people would come up to me after the class and tell me that the best thing I told them was that it wasn't their fault for getting diabetes. Kashan, you can see the guilt melt off their faces because they've been walking around feeling like, gee, I brought this on myself. I'm so ashamed of it. And I'm not going to talk about it. And, now they don't have to feel ashamed anymore. What we need to do really is get our entire society to understand that So we get rid of this guilt and shame, because it's not just the medical people, it's everybody out there, the man of the street. A lot of people you know and I know, they think this, and you can't blame them because that's what they've been told forever.
Absolutely.
It just turns out that it's wrong. I'll give you an example that really struck me. I was in manufacturing. I co-owned a company that was a founder. We melted metal, melted stainless steel, and poured it into molds to make all kinds of industrial things. So it was a tough kind of business. You get, I don't know if this is incorrect to say, but you need kind of a macho sort of person in this kind of business. You're dealing with thousands of pounds of molten metal, and it's hot and it's dirty and all the rest. So you need people who are tough, whether they're male or female. Well, this guy, Jerry, worked for me for probably 30 years. But when I became let me back up. When I became diabetic, I didn't tell anybody about it. I kept it a secret myself.
Okay.
Because especially being in that kind of business, you don't want people thinking you're weaker or, you just don't need it. It's tough enough as it is. So the only people I told were my relatives and friends. And if somebody had a real need to know that I had diabetes, I would tell them. But otherwise, I kept it a secret. So Jerry worked for me during that time. I ran into him a few years ago, and he was in a wheelchair. He told me that he had type 2 diabetes, and he ignored it. After a while, he couldn't take the pain anymore, so he went to the hospital, and they took one leg on one day and the other on the next. So now he's in a wheelchair. He told me that if I ever get diabetes, to make sure I take care of it. Now, I had already had it for 30 years, but he didn't know that because I kept it a secret. And, I wonder, what if I didn't keep it a secret? What if everybody knew I had diabetes and Jerry came to me and said, gee, Chet, I've got this, and I know you have it, but what can you tell me? He might be alive today, Kashan.
Wow.
He might be alive today. But that's what this secrecy does. I would never equate diabetes with cancer. But if you look at the way we deal with people who get cancer, we're all supportive. We all know they didn't bring it on themselves. They have support groups. They have classes to go to. And it's just a tremendous supportive network that they have immediately. Well, diabetes is exactly the opposite. We get the disease and we clam up about it. And nobody talks about it. So you might have two people with diabetes and neither one knows that he has it.
Right.
Whereas if they talked about it, they could compare notes and support each other. But that's not the way it is. And that's the big problem I see. That is really why I'm doing what I'm doing. I just want to get the facts out there, get rid of the stigma, and get respect for diabetics who fight it, but also encourage people who don't fight it to do it. To encourage them to get the help and to pay attention.
So it sounds sorry, Chet. Going back to the premise of secrecy. Secrecy is so dangerous based on what you're in regards to diabetes. Yeah. Secrecy kills.
Yeah, well, that's what I think. I mean, how can it not? Especially since people don't know the facts.
Right.
There aren't that many places for diabetics to go to really find the facts. You can go online, and good luck with that because you have no idea about the basics of diabetes. You can't tell what's true from what's not true. And there's a lot out there that is not true. For example, there are lots of places you can go that tell you there's a cure for diabetes, and they can show you how to do it. But what they mean by that is that there's a certain level at which diabetes is diagnosed. They say that if your blood sugar is over that level, then you're diabetic. But if you bring it down below that level, then you're cured. Well, you might be over that level because you ate a lot of ice cream the night before, so your blood sugar is high. The following day, you go for a walk and you don't eat any carbohydrates at all, and that'll drop your blood sugar. But that doesn't cure the disease. It doesn't get rid of insulin resistance. There is no cure for insulin resistance. And that's the point. It doesn't matter what your blood sugar is, you are in that fight. So you can go
Forever.
forever,
Wow.
and
Wow.
here's one thing. Get this. There was a podcast that I looked into getting on. And so I talked to this person. She was actually a healthcare person. And she said she didn't know much about diabetes, but the one thing she knew was that type 2 was more easily curable than type 1 was. And I'm thinking, where do I start with this person? You know what I'm saying? Because if I didn't go on her show, because I figured all I was going to get is a rolling of the eyes, because she would tell me that she knew better, and she doesn't know better. She doesn't know the facts. So that's something else that adds to the stigma. Other people are out there saying, well, gee, I know you can cure it or reverse it. I mean, if you can do that, then why don't you?
Right.
Why do you still have diabetes after 20 years? I mean, you could have cured it. Why not?
Right. That was me. I had that form of thinking. I will go on the record and say I was ignorant to that. So the challenge diabetes program, how do one get involved in it? Like what is it? Should that be mandatory? Should primary doctors have your challenge diabetes program?
Frankly, I think so. Well, first off, I haven't been doing the program in person because what I'm doing is dedicating myself to the podcast. I'm getting on quite a few. But the other thing I'm doing is putting the program on video so that people will be able to get the entire thing on video. The class I was doing in person had 3 parts. One is where I explain the basics of diabetes, which I did earlier in the show. Then we get into diet, we get into exercise, and then we talk about medications. So it's a much more involved thing that I'm going to be able to do with you in the short time we have. But I'm almost done putting that together, and I'm going to make that available at my website. And when I do that, I'd like to cover my costs. So I'm going to sell the program for I don't know, $19, something like that. And I'm going to ask people if you have a group, whether it's friends or in your church or civic group or Rotary Club, whatever it might be, if you could spend the $19 and show it to your group, that would make a tremendous difference. And that's an easy way to get involved in the program. There are other parts to it, too, that I'll add on as time goes on. But the most important thing is just sharing the kind of thing we're talking about today. And you will be able to do that.
Hey, Chet, where are you located?
I'm in Western Massachusetts. I live in Long Meadow. It's a town right outside of Springfield, which you may have heard of because it's where the Basketball Hall of Fame is.
Yes. Well, we live in Atlanta, Georgia. My wife, her name is Dominique. She is a Rotarian. She is a part of the Duluth Rotary Club. And of course, for you to get from Massachusetts to Atlanta is not probably possible. But your program, like how would, diabetes is, I lost 2 women near and dear to my heart because of that. And I'm sure there are other individuals that are dealing with diabetes. I was at a house talking to a gentleman 2-3 days ago. He needed he's trying to decipher, should he leave his home or get a ranch style home, or they love the house that they're in, but they need some assistance with mobilities. He has Parkinson's and he has diabetes, and he's 63, 67 years old. And he said, Keyshawn, we were talking, he falls all the time. I was at his house. He was sitting in the walker where you hold your arms out. He was just sitting in the seat, and he went to go stand up, and he just fell.
Yeah.
People need to hear this message on the facts on diabetes. So what other details do you go over in the Challenge Diabetes program?
Well, I go through diet and explain about the carbohydrates, and I give examples of high carbohydrate foods. I also talk about low carbohydrate substitutes and the way you just have to look at food differently. One of the things I tell people is that potato is very high in carbohydrate.
Mm-hmm.
And I love French fries just like everybody else.
Absolutely.
But what I would do, instead of eating fries, what I found is that most restaurants will offer a vegetable instead. And that doesn't sound appetizing.
It does not.
I know. I cringe too, Kashan. I did. I'm an American. I like that kind of food.
Absolutely.
But I'm diabetic. And I know that if I eat those fries, it's going to drive my blood sugar up. Now, maybe you don't want to eat the vegetables, but at least you don't need to eat as many fries.
Okay.
So cut down on the fries. I'll give you, I don't know how much you know about Polish cuisine, but I'm Polish. I was at a dinner one time, and I ordered the Polish platter. It's got kielbasa, which is a sausage.
I love the kielbasas, man. I told you I'm from Brooklyn, New York, man. I love the kielbasas.
Well, it really is Polish soul food. I'm not surprised. But what you got, that stuff. Then you've got pierogies, which are basically dough turnovers. Okay,
I know what pierogies are. They taste good, my friend.
They're excellent.
Yes.
but they're high carb. Then you got galumpkies, which it's stuffed cabbage. So like any other stuffed cabbage, you got rice and you got pork in there. And then they give you a couple pieces of bread. Well, this guy sitting next to me knew I had diabetes. And he looked at the plate, and he looked at me and he says, "You going to eat all that?" I said, "Peter, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm only going to eat one of those pieces of bread. I'm looking at that galumpki there, and I know there's rice in it. That's going to raise my carbs, but the pork won't, because meats don't raise your blood sugar."
Okay.
So I'm gonna eat that because it's gonna raise the stomach. It's not going to be a killer. I love pierogies, so I'm going to eat them. But then I'm going to load up on the kielbasa and the sauerkraut because that stuff is not going to raise my blood sugar.
Not at all.
So that's what I was explaining to him. The way I have to look at food is you look at it and I ask myself, where are the carbs? And then I figure out where they are and I decide how much of what I'm going to eat. And I manage to regulate my diet that way. So that's what diabetics have to do. You just can't go in there and eat a whole ton of bread. You can't sit there like at Olive Garden. Go to Olive Garden, you can have all the bread you want, all the pasta you want. Well, I'll tell you what, all that stuff is a killer. I mean, it's all high carbohydrate. In fact, I had a woman in my class one time. Her blood sugars were in the 200s, and she couldn't get them down. So it turned out that her husband worked the second shift, and he would come home and have supper, and he loved pasta. So she would cook him pasta every night, and then she ate dinner with him. So she was eating the pasta too. So I told her, why don't you try this just for next week? Because we had classes every week for 3 weeks, so I knew I was going to see her the following week. I said, why don't you not eat the pasta for a week and eat something else instead? I'll give you some ideas as to what to eat. She comes back a week later. Her blood sugars were in the low 100s because that was what was causing her blood sugar to be so high. But she didn't know it because she didn't realize that the pasta is what was doing it to her. And that's what I tell people. I usually just ask them, gee, what did you eat today? And you'd be surprised how many people tell me, well, I reasonable breakfast, lunch, okay. But the killer is at night. A lot of people eat cold cereal for a snack at night. And Raisin Bran is a popular one because people think it's healthy for them.
Okay.
And it may be good for you, for other people. But the bran is a carbohydrate. The raisins are carbohydrate.
Oh my gosh.
And just for fun, they sprinkle it with sugar. So Raisin Bran is a very high carbohydrate food, even though it looks like it's healthy.
My grandmother always ate Sun-made raisins.
Okay.
The in the red boxes.
Yeah.
So that you're saying that's carbohydrates?
Yeah.
Oh man.
And I'm not saying don't eat them. I'm just saying eat them in context. There are many vegetables are very low in carbohydrate, and a lot of vegetables taste very good. there are other foods you can find that you like that you can eat instead. Salads. I know I was never a big salad eater. I do eat a lot more of those today. But if you eat a salad and you put chicken on it, chicken doesn't raise your your blood sugar at all. In fact, meats, cheeses, fish, none of that raises your blood sugar. So
Okay.
you can eat all that stuff you want. In fact, the best thing to do is for a lunch, instead of having two whole pieces of bread, you could have one piece of bread, make a half a sandwich, but load it up with tuna or whatever you want to eat. Because not only will that stuff you're filling up on not raise your blood sugar, but it'll make you feel full longer. The other problem with carbohydrate is it digests very quickly. It just zips into your bloodstream, where
Wow.
the protein slows it all down and it digests more slowly, so you stay feeling full longer. So you don't feel like you have to eat more often. You eat a donut.
Wow.
You eat a donut in the morning, and you're hungry by 10 o'clock, right? You're
Yeah,
like, I got to have another
absolutely.
snack. So
Absolutely.
if you can avoid that, you're making life a little easier for yourself. But I offer lots of practical things like that. It's not a theory that I can tell you, well, stop eating as many carbohydrates. Well, that's great. But if you don't know where to find the carbohydrates or how to find the carbohydrates, then it does you no good at all.
No good. No good. I love your question. Where are the carbs?
Yeah.
I like that. Is there an app that you use? Like, how do you locate where the carbs are?
Yeah. Well, there are lots of places. One, there are books that they're called calorie counter books, but they have them that will have the carb content in there too. So you can look up the carbohydrate. If you're going to a restaurant, on most restaurant websites, they'll tell you what the carb content of the
Mm,
foods are. But the easiest thing is if you have Alexa or Siri, you can just ask, what the carbohydrates are. In fact, I was doing a podcast and I was explaining that to a guy, and I said, "Do you have Alexa near you, by the way?"
Oh no, I don't have Alexa. No.
Okay. Well, I said, well, all you got to do is ask Alexa. Just say, Alexa, how many carbs in an ear of corn? And the guys had an Alexa in the same room, and you can hear it in the background. There are 25 carbs in an ear of corn. you know. So,
Wow.
but you can just Google it.
Okay.
Google corn carbs, and it'll come up. So it's easy. There are lots of ways to find out what the carbs are. And what I suggest people do is instead of worrying about every food in the world, the only food you really have to worry about is the stuff you're actually eating.
What it?
So if you take a look at your own diet, your breakfasts are usually pretty much the same. We get up,
Correct. Hmm.
you know,
Eggs,
uh,
bacon, stuff
yeah,
like that. Hmm.
yeah, toast,
Yeah.
whatever. It's pretty much the same. You get up and half asleep, and so you know the drill. Lunches are also pretty much the same. You might have a sandwich or whatever it might be. Dinners will change, much more often than those other two meals do. But if you look at it over the course of a month, you're repeating those meals too. So you don't have that many meals to worry about. So the thing to do is ask that question: where are the carbs? Every time you make your breakfast, where are the carbs? Well, maybe I should have a little more sausage and not eat that extra piece of toast, or have more. excuse me. Have more eggs. Eggs also don't raise your blood sugar. I once did a program for homeless people, believe it or not, and they were given a breakfast. The breakfast had scrambled eggs, sausage, and grits. So it was perfect. I said, you look at your plate, you ask yourself, where are the carbs? Well, the grits have carbs, but the sausage and eggs don't. So if you like the grits, go ahead and eat some grits. No problem, but you don't have to fill up on them. Eat the grits for the taste and then fill up on the sausage and the eggs. And there you go. You've helped control your blood sugar.
Right.
So it's really, once you get used to thinking that way, it's not so hard, especially when you realize that really the total number of different foods we eat are just not that great.
And Chet, I have enjoyed this conversation. I really have, and I've learned so much. I'm actually taking notes. I can't go back to Excuse me, I can't wait to go back and rewatch and re-listen to this information. I do have one last question for you. If you can
Sure.
sum it up, you said that you were diagnosed in 81 with diabetes. Yep. I wasn't even born yet. I wasn't even born yet.
You're just a kid.
Just a kid, man, still wet behind the ears. But with that being said, you have so much wisdom, so much knowledge and understanding in your time and things that you have seen and experienced. My question to you for our listeners and for our viewers, what does being a champion mean to you?
Being a champion, this isn't related to diabetes. But being a champion is being a good father and grandfather. I've got 3 grandchildren, and I love them dearly, and I want to do right by them. And I think as a man, that is my number one role in life. So I'm a champion if I'm able to develop good relationships, see them grow up with the sense of right and wrong, a sense that working hard and playing by the rules is important, and being decent people is the most important thing of all. Treat all people nicely. Do unto others as you would do unto them. Yeah, that's what it is, Kashan. I mean, I could launch into a big thing about how I'm a champion if I get X number of people to deal with diabetes well, but that's not really what it's about for me.
I appreciate that. Where could our viewers and listeners reach you?
They can go to challengediabetes.us. There's a contact us page on there.
Okay. All right. Any social medias or anything like that? Or just
I actually don't do social media.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
But you do podcasts.
Well, I do. And you know what? I feel like podcasts are just far superior because of the time you can give me.
That is true.
You can't get that other places.
I appreciate you. Chet. Hey, Champion Nation, I hope that you learned so much today. I know I did. When it comes down to diabetes, it's not about being overweight. You didn't bring it on yourself, according to Chet. And the other thing is, it's time as a society for us to drop the negative connotations surrounded around diabetes. And if you are a diabetic, here's a question to ask yourself. Where are the carbs? Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Enjoy your day and have a champion week. Take care.
This episode was dedicated to my mom, Kimberly Cooper.